The vast, barren wasteland stretched endlessly before Sarah. A desolate desert planet, called Niver, orbiting a distant star, uncharted by any intergalactic civilization before the human colonization efforts began. The air was thin, and the sky was an oppressive, unbroken shade of ochre. For as long as she had been on Niver, the sun had seemed eternal, never setting, casting an unyielding heat upon the entire landscape. Her mission was simple: explore. Gather samples. Understand the terrain. A standard procedure for any interplanetary explorer. Yet there was something deeply unsettling about the planet. Despite its seeming desolation, it had a strange aura. An energy. A pulse. Standing beside the massive rocks of the crater she'd just discovered, Sarah's head buzzed with thoughts. She wasn't alone. The alien teacher, Zar, was supposed to guide her, supposed to instruct her in the sciences and mechanics of alien technology. Yet Zar had claimed, with unwavering certainty, that no species could survive on Niver. The desert planet was a graveyard. "I don't understand why we're still here, Sarah," Zar's voice crackled over the communicator in her earpiece. "Your kind is fragile. You won't last long. There is no water. No vegetation. Nothing to sustain you. You should have left with the rest of your crew." "Zar, you don't know humanity," Sarah replied, wiping the sweat from her brow. "We're adaptable. We survive." Zar's response was laced with doubt. Survival without water? Impossible. No species has ever managed it. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. She was determined to prove the alien wrong. Sarah spent days searching the wasteland for anything resembling sustenance, anything that might indicate life. Zar, from the safety of the colony's research center, continued to monitor her every move, offering frequent lectures on the futility of survival on a desert planet. According to the alien, the planet's ecosystem had collapsed eons ago, and its resources were utterly depleted. The desert wind howled as Sarah trekked across a rocky outcrop, her boots grinding against the dust. The air was so dry it felt like it could suffocate her. Still, she continued. Every step she took felt more like an act of defiance than exploration. On the third day, something caught her eye. A faint shimmer in the distance, almost like a mirage, but it didn't waver. It was a blue glint, far out on the horizon. Without hesitation, Sarah pushed forward, the heat almost unbearable as she struggled toward the strange reflection. It wasn't much, just a small depression in the earth, but as she reached it, her breath caught. It was a pool, though small and murky. The liquid shimmered with an iridescent glow, unlike anything she'd seen before. It wasn't much, but it was water. Sarah knelt beside it, scooping some of the liquid into her hand and tasting it. It was brackish, but unmistakably water. "This is impossible," she muttered to herself, realizing that she had just found what Zar had claimed didn't exist. Defying the teacher. That evening, when Sarah returned to the research station, she couldn't wait to report her discovery. She was certain Zar would be stunned. He had warned her about the futility of searching for water. He had been wrong. "Zar, you won't believe this," Sarah said over the communication link as soon as she entered the base. "I found water. It's not much, but it's real." Zar's reply was calm, almost dismissive. "Impossible. The environmental scans indicate no such source." Sarah, undeterred, clicked a few buttons on her terminal and sent a sample of the liquid she had found. "I've sent you the data. Check it yourself." "You're wrong, Zar." For a long moment, there was silence, and then Zar's voice crackled through once again. "This cannot be. No species has survived this long here. Not with this water source. It's a mistake." Sarah chuckled. "A mistake? That's all you've got?" There was a pause. When Zar spoke again, there was a hint of something like uncertainty in his voice. Perhaps I have miscalculated. But even so, you cannot stay. This planet is cursed." Sarah's frustration flared. "You're not getting it, Zar. This is life. There's something here. Something we can work with. The next few days were filled with a renewed sense of purpose for Sarah. She continued her search for more water, hoping to uncover a hidden reservoir or more sources that could sustain her. Every step brought a new discovery, though each was smaller than the last. It was on the sixth day that Sarah stumbled across something truly strange, a set of markings etched into the side of a rock formation she had passed by several times. The symbols were ancient, unlike anything she had encountered on Earth or in any alien text she had studied with Zar. Her instincts told her to investigate, so she began to carefully brush away the dust, revealing what looked like a series of intricate lines and figures. There were geometric shapes, and, most striking of all, there was a symbol resembling a primitive tool, a kind of digging device. It looked crude, yet efficient, like a spade or a hand shovel. Excitedly, Sarah traced the design with her fingers, noticing that there were faint grooves where a tool might fit. It was as if the tool had been designed to interact with the environment in a way that would allow its user to access water. She retrieved a basic toolkit from her gear, hoping that she could replicate the shape from the markings. By the next morning, Sarah had crafted a makeshift digging tool, nothing fancy, but enough to start digging where the symbol had indicated. Sarah spent hours digging beneath the surface, sweat dripping from her brow under the scorching sun. Finally, just when she thought she had hit bedrock, her tool scraped against something hard. A sudden rush of excitement filled her, and she continued to dig with renewed vigor. When she pulled the last stone away, she found a small, circular aperture sealed with a kind of thick, metallic membrane. It wasn't like anything Sarah had seen before, but she knew what it was. A vault. A reservoir. A place where water could have been stored and protected for centuries or even millennia. Carefully, she used the tool to press against the seal, and to her surprise, it gave way. Inside, there was a dark, cool chamber filled with clear, glistening water. It was pure, it was fresh, and it was abundant. Sarah let out a cry of triumph. She had done it. She had found the key to surviving on Niver. When Sarah contacted Zar, she could hear the disbelief in his voice. "You found it. The water. But how? This should not be possible." "I told you, Zar," Sarah said, her voice firm but elated. "There is more to this planet than meets the eye. You've underestimated humanity and this world." "But this water," Zar persisted. "It cannot be. It must have been hidden for a reason. This planet has a history of extinction. The ecosystem collapsed for a reason." "Maybe it's time to rewrite that history," Sarah countered. "What if the collapse wasn't as final as you think? What if there's more here than we realized?" Zar paused. "I don't know. I can only tell you this: no species can survive Niver. And yet, you have found a way." "Don't write us off so easily, Zar," Sarah said, smiling. "We'll survive. We'll thrive." The discovery of water on Niver did more than just prove Zar wrong. It sparked a chain reaction of new understanding about the planet's history. Researchers, both human and alien, began to pore over the data Sarah had gathered, uncovering signs of ancient civilizations that had once thrived there. Sarah became a symbol of human ingenuity and determination. She had not only survived a planet thought to be uninhabitable, but had found a way to harness its resources and unlock the secrets it held. The human race, once thought to be too fragile to survive on such a harsh world, now had the potential to flourish. Zar, for all his wisdom, had failed to account for one thing: the human spirit. No species, alien or human, could predict what it was capable of when faced with the unknown. As Sarah stood on the edge of the water-filled chamber, watching the first signs of life returning to the desert around her, she realized that the real lesson wasn't about survival. It was about hope. And with that hope, humanity had found a new home. The weeks following Sarah's discovery passed in a whirlwind of activity. The research team had expanded, bringing in geologists, biologists, and engineers, all eager to study the newly uncovered water source. They set up equipment around the reservoir, analyzing the water's composition, testing the soil for nutrients, and evaluating the ancient technology that had kept it hidden for so long. But the more they dug, the more they uncovered. The vault, though once thought to be a simple reservoir, was much more than that. It was part of a sprawling underground complex, a hidden city, long abandoned, with walls covered in intricate alien symbols, strangely advanced machinery, and traces of an extinct civilization that had once called Niver home. Sarah led many of the expeditions into the labyrinthine depths beneath the surface. With each new find, her belief in the potential of the planet grew stronger. It wasn't just about water anymore. Niver held something greater, something far older. The alien artifacts and ruins told a story of a species that had, at one point, mastered both nature and technology in ways far beyond human comprehension. "Look at this," Sarah whispered to her team one evening, her voice reverberating in the quiet cavern as they approached a massive structure deep within the complex. It was a doorway, carved into the stone, but it shimmered with energy and aura of light that seemed to pulse with life. Zar, ever cautious and skeptical, had continued to observe from afar, keeping his distance. His transmissions had become more frequent, his tone more urgent. "Sarah, I must insist that you be careful. This place, these ruins, are dangerous. The civilization that once inhabited this world perished because they tampered with forces they didn't understand. Don't you think they left us these clues for a reason?" Sarah responded, her fingers brushing against the shimmering surface of the doorway. "Maybe they didn't perish. Maybe they evolved. Or maybe they found something here. Something that could help us." "I warned you about the water, Sarah," Zar shot back. "Now you're playing with forces far greater than you realize." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before pressing forward. "I'm not just playing with forces, Zar. I'm uncovering them." The door opened with a low hum as Sarah stepped closer, a sense of both dread and wonder filling her. It was as if the structure had been waiting for her touch. The interior was vast and dark, but as they entered, strange lights flickered to life along the walls, casting eerie glows in the gloom. Ancient technology came alive, scanning their movements, adjusting to their presence. The team moved forward, cautiously, as they passed by enormous machinery mechanisms built to manage water, to control temperature, and to regulate the planet's environment. But there were also devices that defied Sarah's understanding, twisting and pulsing with energy, their functions unclear. They reached the heart of the complex, a colossal chamber, wide and expansive, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center of the room was a massive, spherical structure, levitating inches above the floor. It hummed, a deep, resonant sound that reverberated through their bones. It was a machine, but it was more than just a machine. It felt alive. "Is this a weapon?" one of the engineers asked, his voice trembling. "I don't think so," Sarah replied, stepping closer. "It looks more like a power source. A generator. Maybe something to control the planet's climate." But Zar's voice cut through the moment of wonder. "I told you, Sarah. This is not a place to be explored lightly. The species that built this device, they perished because they did not understand it. They harnessed too much energy, and it tore their civilization apart." Sarah turned to the team, looking at their faces. "We can't turn back now. We have a chance to make something great of this. A chance to bring life back to Niver." Her words filled the room with a palpable sense of resolve. Even Zar, though skeptical, remained silent, watching as Sarah approached the spherical machine. "Let me see if I can activate it," Sarah said softly, more to herself than anyone else. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the smooth, cold surface of the machine. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy shot through her, almost knocking her back. Her body was flooded with images, visions of the alien civilization, their rise, their fall, and their desperate attempt to manipulate the very forces of nature they had once controlled. But one image stood out more than the others, a figure, humanoid but alien, standing alone before a great, destructive storm. The figure was reaching out, trying to control the wind, the fire, the very atmosphere itself. Suddenly, the vision stopped. The chamber was silent again. Sarah was breathing heavily, her heart racing. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she said to Zar, her voice trembling slightly. Zar's transmission crackled. "I saw it. But it is dangerous. It's not something we can understand, Sarah. It's beyond us." "No," Sarah said, standing taller. "It's not beyond us. We can learn. We can use it to save this world. We can rebuild Niver." In the days that followed, Sarah continued to study the machine. As her understanding of its mechanisms grew, so did the sense of awe and dread. The device was not just a power source, it was a stabilizer, capable of controlling the planet's weather, restoring balance to its ecosystem, and potentially bringing back life on a scale never before seen. But as Sarah worked alongside the alien and human researchers, something darker began to emerge from the depths of the ancient texts and artifacts they had uncovered. The power required to operate the device was immense, and the consequences of using it were unknown. One evening, as Sarah sat in her quarters, staring at the schematics on her terminal, Zar's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You cannot do this," he warned. "If you activate that device, you will invite chaos. The very forces of nature you hope to control will control you." Sarah clenched her jaw. "I'm not afraid of chaos. We've fought chaos before. You think we can't handle it?" "It's not about handling it, Sarah. It's about understanding it," Zar replied gravely. "The civilization that built this your species is not ready for this kind of power." For a moment, Sarah felt doubt creep into her mind. Was Zar right? Was humanity ready to wield such power? Could they truly control what had once destroyed an entire civilization? But then she remembered the dry, dusty world she had first set foot on. She remembered the water, the discoveries, and the hope that had blossomed in her chest. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice steady. "I believe in us. I believe in humanity." She knew that whatever path she chose, it would come with risk. But she was no longer willing to turn back. The choice had been made. The day came when Sarah made her final decision. With a sense of determination and urgency, she and the team gathered around the spherical device, ready to activate it. The chamber was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. "Are you sure about this?" one of the engineers asked, nervously eyeing the glowing machine. "We have no other choice," Sarah replied, her hand hovering over the control panel. "This planet needs us." As she pressed the button, the machine roared to life, sending waves of energy across the cavern. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the atmosphere above them began to change. Dark clouds rolled in, swirling with unprecedented speed. The temperature began to shift, cooling the once scorching desert air. And then, the rains came. The first droplets were faint, but soon they grew into a torrential downpour, flooding the dry surface of Niver, rejuvenating the cracked earth. It was an awakening, a renewal. And for the first time in centuries, the barren world began to pulse with life once more. Sarah stood in awe, watching as the landscape transformed before her eyes. New grasses sprouted from the soil, and strange, resilient plants began to grow, reaching toward the sky. The water, once a scarce and precious resource, now flowed freely, feeding the planet's rebirth. But as the world around her shifted, she knew one thing: the real challenge was just beginning. Niver's true potential had been unlocked, but so had its risks. The forces they had unleashed were powerful and unpredictable. "Are we sure we're ready for this?" one of the scientists asked, his voice trembling. Sarah looked out over the newly green horizon, her heart full of hope. "We have to be." And in that moment, she realized the ultimate truth: survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about learning, growing, and taking the next step, no matter how uncertain the future might be. The path ahead was uncharted, but humanity had taken its first step on a new world. And that, she knew, was just the beginning. Niver had been reborn. And with it, so had humanity. Chapter 12, The Calm Before the Storm. The days following the activation of the machine were a blur of discovery and transformation. Niver's landscape had been irrevocably changed. Where there had once been nothing but barren sand and parched earth, lush greenery now spread across the land. Watercourses had formed, rivers and streams cutting through the arid plains like veins. It was as though the planet itself had awoken from a long, forgotten slumber. But with every triumph, there were consequences. The rains, once a blessing, had become erratic and violent. The weather systems that had been dormant for so long were unpredictable. The new ecosystems were growing at an alarming rate, some species thriving in the altered environment, while others, native to the old world, were quickly dying out. "Look at this," Sarah said to her team one morning, standing on a cliff overlooking what had once been a desert valley. Below, the earth seemed to be tearing itself apart, landslides, flooding, and whirlwinds ravaging the landscape. In places, the ground had cracked open, and strange gas-like fumes hissed from fissures that had been dormant for millennia. Zar's voice echoed in her earpiece, his words filled with frustration. "This is what I warned you about. The machine you activated has unbalanced the very fabric of Niver's atmosphere. The energy it released is not natural, it is chaotic. And you've disturbed the equilibrium." Sarah clenched her jaw. "You don't understand. We can adapt. We can learn to live with it. Adaptation is not enough. What you've unleashed could destroy this world just as easily as it has restored it," Zar replied, his voice thick with concern. "The device was never meant to be used. Its purpose was to stabilize the planet, not revive it. You have no idea what you're tampering with." "We'll figure it out," Sarah said, her voice steely. "We have to." But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Zar's warnings echoed in her mind as she stared out at the tumultuous landscape below. Had they made a mistake? Were they too late to reverse the damage they had caused? Despite the chaos outside, Sarah pushed forward. The team began working tirelessly to analyze the new developments. The landscape was changing so rapidly that they could scarcely keep up with the data. The plant life was evolving at a terrifying pace, with some species growing and spreading uncontrollably, while others seemed to mutate into forms that defied understanding. It was as though the ecosystem itself was attempting to recalibrate, but it couldn't find a stable ground. Days blurred into weeks, and Sarah found herself spending more and more time in the ruins beneath the surface, poring over the ancient texts and blueprints they had recovered from the vault. There had to be something she had missed, some hidden clue or warning left behind by the original inhabitants of Niver. She combed through the walls of the underground city, the alien symbols still as enigmatic as ever, but now they seemed to take on a new meaning, a sense of urgency. Then one evening, while investigating another chamber deep within the ruins, she found something that made her blood run cold. The chamber was far larger than any they had encountered before. In the center of it stood a towering structure, an obelisk, pulsating with a dim, eerie light. The symbols on the walls surrounding it were different, more complex, and they seemed to be warning of something. This isn't like the others," Sarah whispered to herself, running her fingers along the intricate carvings. What were they trying to tell us? The symbols seemed to depict a catastrophe, destruction brought by uncontrolled energy, the same kind of energy she had unleashed by activating the spherical device. She studied them, feeling a growing sense of dread. It was as though the ancient civilization had tried to warn anyone who might come after them, "Don't repeat our mistake." But it was too late. Sarah returned to the surface, her mind heavy with the knowledge she had uncovered. She had learned too much, too late. The device had not just caused an imbalance in the atmosphere. It had opened a gateway, one that had been sealed for millennia. The civilization that had once lived on Niver had tried to harness the very forces of the planet, the fundamental energies that governed its balance. But instead of stabilizing the world, they had unleashed a cascade of environmental chaos, triggering a planetary-wide disaster. The machine they had activated had only been part of a much larger system. It was never meant to revive Niver, it was meant to prevent the planet's complete collapse, to keep the delicate balance intact. But now that the energy was free, it was disrupting everything, unraveling the very fabric of the planet's ecosystem. Sarah, you have to understand, Zar's voice came over the comms, his tone desperate. This is not just a storm. This is an event in awakening. You've triggered a chain reaction that will destroy everything. Tell me what to do, Zar. Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. What can we do to fix this? The alien paused for a moment. The only way to stop it is to reverse the activation. You must find a way to deactivate the machine. If it keeps drawing power from the core of the planet, Niver will collapse. You have to understand it was never meant for this kind of use. The device is connected to the very core of the planet. It's what sustains the atmosphere, the ecosystem, and the weather patterns. If you try to reverse it, you'll have to face the forces of nature itself. Sarah clenched her fists. I can't let it all fall apart. We've come too far. Then you will face the consequences of your actions, Zar warned. No one can control this kind of power. But Sarah couldn't back down. She had already seen the potential of this world. She had to try. There had to be a way to balance the chaos, to make things right. The sky above the colony darkened, the winds picking up speed as another violent storm rolled in from the horizon. The once peaceful, serene world of Niver was now a place of destruction, of constant turmoil. Earthquakes shook the ground, massive dust storms blotted out the sun, and the newly formed rivers threatened to overflow their banks, drowning the lands that had once flourished with life. Sarah stood at the base of the obelisk she had uncovered, her heart pounding in her chest. The machine, this powerful, ancient device, was more than she had imagined. It was as if it had a life of its own, feeding off the energy of the planet. Her team had found the central control panel, deep within the heart of the obelisk. The instructions, carved into the walls, were clear. In order to stop the chaos, they would need to shut down the device. But to do that, they would need to reverse the flow of energy, rebind the forces that had been unleashed. As Sarah moved toward the control panel, she glanced at the others, their faces strained with fear. We need to do this. For the planet. For all of us. Zar's voice crackled through her earpiece once more. Sarah, if you do this, it will not be the same world anymore. You can never undo the damage, not fully. Are you prepared to sacrifice everything for a world that may never be the same again? Sarah closed her eyes, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She thought of the green shoots, the rivers, the life that had begun to thrive on this world. But she also thought of the storms, the destruction, and the collapse that loomed just beyond the horizon. She looked at the control panel, knowing that the future of Niver and perhaps humanity itself was in her hands. I'm ready, she whispered. With one final breath, Sarah pressed the button. Chapter 20, The Awakening of New Life. The aftermath of Sarah's gamble was nothing short of miraculous. The planet was still alive, breathing, pulsing with new energy. The violent storms had subsided, the ground settled, and the once fractured sky had cleared to reveal the bright blue of a world now full of possibility. Niver had stabilized, but as Sarah stood amidst the transformed landscape, she knew that stability was fragile. It would take time, patience, and most crucially wisdom to navigate the challenges ahead. But that first night, under the stars of a sky no longer choked by violent winds, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. They had not only survived, they had reclaimed a world that had nearly destroyed them. Niver was alive. But was it enough? As the colony's engineers worked around the clock to maintain the systems they had created, Sarah took a walk across the newly formed riverbanks. The once dry land was now covered in patches of lush vegetation, and newly sprouted plants twisted and turned toward the sky, eager to absorb the life-giving sunlight. This feels unreal, Sarah murmured to herself, kneeling to touch the cool water that now flowed freely through the valley. It was the same water she had discovered months ago, the lifeblood of Niver now augmented by the planetary forces she had tapped into. Yet, despite the outward calm, something gnawed at the back of her mind. She knew that she and her team had not been the first to unlock the planet's secrets. The civilization that had once inhabited Niver had left its mark, and the destructive force of the device they had activated could not be taken lightly. If anything, it was only the beginning of a far greater journey. Sarah's sleepless nights became a pattern as she spent hours in the research facility, examining the data they had gathered. Her team continued to monitor the planet's weather systems, watching for any signs that the energy flow from the core was again becoming unstable. Although they had succeeded in preventing the immediate collapse, Sarah knew that the underlying issue, the balance of the forces, had not been fully addressed. But then, just as she was about to leave the lab, a transmission from Zar broke through, static and garbled, but urgent. "Sarah," his voice crackled, "you need to listen. There's something more to the device. The balance isn't just tied to the core, it's tied to something older, deeper. You're not dealing with just the energy of the planet. You're dealing with something that was never meant to be disturbed." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What else haven't we uncovered?" "I've been reviewing your findings," Zar continued, his voice growing clearer as the transmission stabilized. "The machine you activated wasn't just a stabilizer. It was part of a larger network, one that spanned across the entire planet. The civilization that created it had linked the energy of Niver to a central hub, almost like a neural network. You've only awakened a small part of it. What you're seeing now, these changes in the environment, they are just the surface effects of something far larger." Sarah's stomach twisted. "Are you saying we've only unlocked a fragment of the power?" "I'm saying," Zar replied, "that what you've awakened is far more than a device. It is a conduit. And it wasn't just the planet's weather it was controlling, it was the planet's very life force. You've triggered an irreversible link." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. What they had done could very well reshape Niver's future, and not necessarily for the better. As she processed Zar's warning, a new thought crossed her mind. What if this life force was not just a boon to the planet, but also a tether, one that tied the civilization of Niver to the land itself? What if their downfall had been a result of this very power being misused? "Zar, what do we do now?" Sarah asked, trying to steady her voice. "There's a way to stabilize the entire network," Zar said, his tone now far more urgent. "But it requires accessing the central node, the heart of the planet's energy system. It's located deep below the surface, where the machine's original creators once worked. The only way to truly control the power of Niver is to reconnect with that core system, to understand the full scope of what you've triggered." Sarah's heart raced. "Then we have to find it. We can't just wait for things to spiral out of control again." "No," Zar agreed. "You must go deeper into the heart of Niver, where the civilization's technology is still dormant. There, you will find the truth." Sarah gathered her team, and after preparing the necessary equipment for a deep excavation, they set off toward the coordinates Zar had transmitted. The journey was long and perilous, and the deeper they ventured into the planet's surface, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air became thick with humidity, and strange subterranean winds whistled through the narrow tunnels they carved into the planet's crust. As they descended, the energy signatures they were tracking grew stronger, and the walls around them began to show signs of ancient architecture, faded murals depicting strange, humanoid figures intertwined with symbols of celestial bodies. The civilization that had once called Niver home had understood the planet in a way that humans had yet to comprehend. When they reached the heart of the excavation, they found a massive chamber, a temple of sorts, with towering pillars carved into the rock. In the center was a colossal machine, its structure almost alien in its intricacy, a web of interlocking circuits and energy conduits that pulsed with a strange, organic glow. "This is it," Sarah said, awe and fear in equal measure. "The heart of the energy system. The place where it all began." Zar's voice came through her earpiece once more. "Be cautious. What you are seeing is not just technology. It is part of Niver itself. If you tamper with it, you may cause an irreversible disruption." Sarah nodded, though she knew that hesitation was no longer an option. "We don't have a choice." With trembling hands, she approached the central node of the machine, a crystalline structure at the core of the temple, glowing with an ethereal light. The energy surged through the room, and Sarah could feel the very earth beneath her feet vibrating with the power that flowed from the planet's core. As she touched the node, the world seemed to shift. Her mind was flooded with visions of the past, the rise and fall of the civilization that had once thrived on Niver. She saw their attempts to harness the power of the planet, their failures, their desperation. They had bound their civilization to the very heart of Niver, creating an energy nexus that linked their fate to the planet's. But as their control over the energy deepened, so did their hubris. They had sought immortality, thinking they could transcend their physical forms. Instead, they had triggered a cataclysm, a spiral of destruction that had nearly wiped them out. Sarah, one of her team members, cried out, snapping her back to reality. Something's happening. The energy, it's reaching critical levels again. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her with a crushing weight. The energy they had unleashed was a living force, one that fed on balance. And now, in order to stabilize it, she would have to become part of the system. The decision was clear. Sarah couldn't just control the energy, she had to become part of it. The machine had never been a simple piece of technology. It was a living system, a neural network that had bound the fate of the planet's inhabitants to its power. If Niver was to survive, Sarah would need to complete the final step of the cycle, merging with the planet's core network and becoming its protector. But she didn't have time to hesitate. The energy around her surged once more, and she knew that if she did not act, everything would unravel. With a final breath, Sarah stepped forward, allowing the energy to flow through her. It was like nothing she had ever experienced, an overwhelming rush of power, ancient and primal. As the energy coursed through her, she felt herself becoming one with the machine, with the planet. She could feel Niver's heartbeat, its pulse, its very essence. And then, she understood. She was no longer just a human. She was part of Niver's ecosystem, its guardian, its keeper. She had become the new link between the planet and the machine, ensuring its stability and the survival of all life on Niver. The room fell silent. The energy stabilized. The power of the planet was no longer in chaos, it was in balance. Niver had a new protector. And together, they would forge a future, bound by both the wisdom of the past and the strength of the present. The awakening of Niver. Sarah and her team had triggered a powerful machine that transformed the barren planet Niver into a thriving ecosystem. However, their success came at a terrible cost. The energy they unleashed destabilized the planet's core, threatening to tear it apart. After a desperate race against time, Sarah discovered the truth. What they had activated was not just a machine, but a conduit to Niver's life force, a network that connected the entire planet. Guided by warnings from Zar, the alien scientist, Sarah ventured deeper into the heart of the planet to find the source of the power. There, she realized the ancient civilization had bound their fate to the planet's energy, and their downfall was a result of their uncontrolled use of it. To restore balance, Sarah had no choice but to merge with the energy system, becoming the planet's new protector. With this self-sacrifice, she stabilized Niver's core, ensuring its survival. As the world began to heal, Sarah understood that Niver's future would rely on the wisdom of the past and the strength of those brave enough to protect it. Niver had a new guardian, one who would ensure that the balance between life and power would never again be disturbed.